What shirt? So that is the McLeish era shirt then.
Yes, this is the home 2009-10 Umbro shirt, F&C Investments, Fish and Chip Investments.
Shit.
With the collar, which I really like. This is I tried to get this one. I was digging around my wardrobe for a McLeish era shirt, and I was like, I wonder if any of them. I thought obviously I've got to wear a McLeish era one for this podcast,
Yeah.
but I thought, will they? Or, surely they won't fit me. So this kit came out in 2009. So I was 12 when this kit came out. And so if you told me then when I was 26, it would still fit me. Um, I think it must have just been quite. I think I remember it being quite baggy on me and quite big when I was a kid. So that's probably it. But and to be fair, it is really tight on like the arms and everything. But I quite like this kit, but more my memories of it are really fond. It was a really good season on the
Yeah.
whole, 2019 for
It's funny
reasons
though,
I'll probably
because
mention later.
yeah, it's funny though, because the shirt that I've got from our McLeish season is like a kid's XL, and it just about still fits me.
Wow, really? I suppose because you would have only had one season. Do you only have one? You must only have one McLeish era kit.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So what are you wearing? What year is that? It's Under Armour. So
This is
2000 and...
16, 17. So this is first year in the
Oh wow, I'd
championship
have thought
away kit. This is a Di Matteo Bruce shirt. Um,
classic.
it was a remake of an
Fond
old
memories.
shirt. Yeah, it was a remake of an old shirt which had like AST on the front, which everyone really loves. But I feel like a lot of our Under Armour, all of our Under Armour kits were quite underrated, I kind of feel, and the fit's really nice and the quality's really good. But yeah, I quite like this one. It's a nice holiday shirt, really. But yeah.
Good for you
The
out in
season was
Italy
crap. We
now,
won't
anyway.
talk about that. The only memories I have of this shirt is losing at Nottingham Forest in the
Should have lost
last
to us as
minute.
well. Although that's in your home kit. True.
We didn't lose to you in the championship.
No, no, you should have at home. It's an Andrews.
Oh
You
yeah,
should
yeah,
have.
yeah,
Well, you're in your home
yeah.
kit anyway, so I think so.
Which is a great shirt as well, actually. I love that shirt.
As Villa kits go, I suppose. Hello, I'm Daniel Sketchley.
And I'm Callum Byrne.
We've been friends for more than 10 years, sharing lifelong passions such as film and music,
But most importantly, football, through the ups and the downs.
the celebration and the heartbreak.
However, he's a blue nose.
And he's a villain.
This is the Second City Podcast. Welcome to a special edition of the Second City Podcast.
In this side series, we're going to be looking into the players and managers that have experienced both B6 and B9.
We're starting with Alex McLeish, who played almost 500 league matches for Aberdeen, winning the Scottish Premiership on 3 occasions, the Scottish Cup 5 times, the Scottish League Cup twice, and also had success on the European stage, winning the Cup Winners' Cup and the Super Cup in 1983.
McLeish would go on to start his management career in Scotland too, winning the First Division with Hibernian before going on to win 7 trophies with the Rangers, including 2 league titles between 2001 and 2006.
In January 2007, he would take charge of the Scottish national team, having made 77 caps as a player, which included playing at 3 World Cups in 1982, 1986, and 1990.
In October of the same year, Birmingham City approached the Scottish Football Association for permission to speak to McLeish about their managerial vacancy, which was refused. But on his return on 27th of November 2007 from attending the draw for the 2010 World Cup qualification in South Africa, he resigned his post as manager of Scotland and was announced as Birmingham's new manager the following day.
His debut saw the Blues beat Tottenham Hotspur 3-2, and in January 2008 would add the likes of David Murphy and James McFadden. However, on the final day of the season, Birmingham were relegated, despite beating Blackburn by 4-1.
But Birmingham would bounce back at the first attempt, and in January 2010, McLeish guided his team to a record 12-game unbeaten run in the top division, and the club would finish 9th place in the Premier League. But 2011 would represent his greatest achievement with Birmingham City, winning the League Cup final with a late winner from Obafemi Martins to defeat favourites Arsenal, stealing only the club's second ever major trophy.
However, a poor run of form would follow the success at Wembley, and Blues were relegated again on the final day of the season. McLeish would resign via email at the end of the season on June the 12th.
5 days later would be the turning point in his managerial career when McLeish moved across the second city to take over at Aston Villa, replacing Gerard Houllier. He became the first manager to move directly between the two clubs.
The move was highly controversial at both the corporate and fan levels of the clubs, with both sets of fans shocked and dismayed. Aston Villa fans protested outside Villa Park, and anti-McLeish graffiti had to be removed from outside Villa's training ground.
McLeish led Villa to 16th place in the Premier League, avoiding relegation by only 2 points, and set an unwanted club record of only 4 home wins all season.
His managerial career never recovered from his loan season at Villa Park. He was sacked as the manager of Nottingham Forest after just 40 days. He had 1 season managing Genk in Belgium before a 10-match stint at Egyptian club Zamalek.
McLeish was then reappointed Scotland manager on 16th of February 2018 on a 2-year contract. Scotland won their 2018-19 UEFA Nations League group under McLeish, but he was sacked on 18th of April 2019 following a 3-0 defeat by Kazakhstan in a poor start to their UEFA Euro 2020 qualifying campaign.
So, Alex McLeish.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, Dan, just a controversial man in the Midlands, really.
Yeah, and a hugely significant person in terms of when he was, certainly speaking as a Blues fan, he was at Blues in a very sort of pivotal time in my sort of I say formative years, but my sort of childhood, teenage years supporting Blues, if you know what I mean. And so it's a strange one because a lot of my fondest memories as a Blues fan, and the very fondest memories from when he was at Blues. But obviously, as we mentioned in the intro, everything that happened afterwards has meant that it means his legacy is a really interesting and bizarre one.
Yeah.
And I find his career trajectory, like we just mentioned, he had huge success in his early career with Rangers and then obviously with Blues. As we'll get into, I think he had a considerable success for a few years, but then it tailed off very quickly. And as you say, his career really hasn't recovered at all since. And we're talking over 10 years later now. So yeah, he's a very interesting figure to look back on. And the impact he's left on Midlands football is very interesting.
So I feel like the only natural place to start when we talk about his career in the Midlands is when he joined Birmingham City from Scotland. You know, he was a man that the board level Blues really wanted because they tried to get him, they were refused, but they did eventually get their man.
Yeah, and it was. I remember. So this was 2007. So we would have been about, I think about 10. I was about 10 or 11. And I remember being. It felt like a breath of fresh air when McLeish did eventually come in, because Steve Bruce had just left and he'd been there for probably 6 years, which is kind of unheard of even now. Like even now, that's a long time, and he was the only Blues manager we had known up to that point, really, for sort of people our age. And I remember McLeish came in, and the club we'd just been promoted back into the Premier League. It was our first season back up, and the owners were still like David Gold, David Sullivan, your Karen Brady was still involved, and so on. That's kind of how long ago it was. And I will never forget, one of my favourite memories ever as a Blues fan is McLeish's first game, which we mentioned in the intro. We beat Tottenham 2 away at White Hart Lane, and we scored in, I think it was like the 93rd minute or something. Sebastian Larsson nicked the ball off, I can't remember who it was, someone in midfield, and he smacks across goal, like probably from about 30, 35 yards out, top corner, last minute, just the most perfect start for a team that wasn't doing particularly well. I think we were about 14 or 15 games in, and we'd only got like 10 or 11 points. We really hadn't started too well, and the squad wasn't looking too well set up to really cope with a potential survival push, trying to stay up. But that first game was just unbelievable, like absolutely incredible. And that Sebastian Larsson goal to this day is one of my favourite Blues goals ever, the only one I can think of off the top of my head that I think is better is Cameron Jerome scored an incredible one a couple of years later away at Liverpool. But the Larsson one for the moment is just so iconic. The season didn't carry on that way. I think we saw the trajectory of the Bruce part of the season and the McLeish part of the season was pretty much the same. McLeish had longer. I think he had about 24, 25 games, and he got, on average, I think he got about a point a game.
Yeah.
Which is, is marginally better than what we were on, but you consider a longer period of games, more time. I think it's roughly the same. But I think it's fair to say that you really can start judging him on his full seasons at Blues. So we got relegated. We finished 19th. We got absolutely hammered away at Villa, which was, I'm sure we'll get onto his record in the derbies in particular, but we got absolutely humiliated away at Villa, 5-1, which is the only football game to this day I've left early. It's the only Villa away game I've been to. Only game I'm pretty sure I've left early, but like by like a signet, by like sort of like 10 minutes or something, not like a minute or two. But so then McLeish's first full season was 2008-9 back in the Championship, and we did get promoted straight back, as you mentioned. This is a season which people, obviously, we were like still so young at the time. I have really fond memories of this season. We finished second, promoted, and McLeish and whoever was in charge of the recruitment did a really good job bringing in some really important signings. There were some real duds in there as well, like Ulysses De La Cruz and all them. Some really kind of Hammer Buatsa, some really forgettable Blues players. But one game wonder, Ulysses De La Cruz. But he also brought in Kevin Phillips, who I'm sure will do one of these style podcasts on Sunday, who was an absolute revelation, scored 16 or 17 goals. Lee Carsley came in midfield from Everton in the Premier League, real coup. In the January, he came in on loan, out of retirement. And I mentioned on the podcast we've been doing up to this point that this in 2023, this is our best start to a season in 15 years. This is the season where we start. This season is 15 years ago. And I'll never forget, I went to Reading away on the last day and we won 2-1. And I think the week before, if we'd beaten, I think it was Preston at home. It was live on Sky. If we'd beaten them at home, we would have been promoted, but we lost 2-1 because of a last-minute free kick. And so the Reading game was literally second versus third, and it was whoever won goes up, basically. And, we won. Keith Fahey, Kevin Phillips both scoring. Unbelievable day. And so those memories are really fun for me. But it's weird, you hear some people, I don't know what your memories are, if you remember that sort of time at all, but I know some Blues fans look back on it and are quite critical of like the style of football and typical McLeish ball, really defensive, tough to beat rather than free flowing or anything like that.
Well, I think we'll touch on McLeish and Villa, I think. But yes, the style of play was definitely something, that very defensive style. It's weird though, because I remember the season where we won 5-1 and we had a good year under Martin O'Neill. But the following year, when you were in the Championship, I don't remember you being in the Championship at all that season, which was weird because in 6 seasons, I think you yo-yoed three, you were up, down, up, down, up, down.
Yeah, I think we had like from 2006 to 2010, we were either promoted or relegated every year, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is pretty mental. But yeah, I don't know if it's because we were so like at that age, you're kind of oblivious to like the style, I guess, and it's just about if you're winning, like fantastic. But I would argue like the most, I think, 2009 when we came back up into the Premier League, and a lot of people had us to go right back down. I think is when people will most look at, despite what happened the following year, that 2009-10 season, I think really showed what McLeish was like truly capable of.
Yeah,
because we came up and we had some money to spend, but obviously this is 2009. But your top clubs, Man United, Chelsea, they're all still spending insane amounts of money in comparison. We bought really smart, really well. We brought in Roger Johnson, Scott Dan at centre backs. We brought Joe Hart in on loan in goal from Man City. Stephen Carr at right back. We brought in Barry Ferguson. Lee Bowyer came in on a permanent. Craig Gardner came in the January, just to name a few examples. And McLeish created a really tough to beat at home mentality and a togetherness that meant that we ended up finishing 9th in the Premier League, which was just unheard of. For us to come up and finish 9th in our first season was remarkable. I think we went on a 12-game unbeaten run in the league over Christmas into the new year. And I think it was 15 in all competitions. And he also did something where I think
record,
it was,
wasn't it, for you?
It was. And the other thing was, I think it was 9 or 10 games where we didn't change the starting 11 at all, which is remarkable. It is completely unheard of, and it was just a basic 4-4-2, but it made it so solid and so tough to beat. And we won 5 games in a row over like just before Christmas. And I remember it. The fifth one was Blackburn at home it was like on Tuesday or Wednesday night, and we only won 2-1. Jerome scored twice, but it was more just the event of it, like under the lights, 5 straight wins. We played so well. It could have been 5-1. We were unbelievable. I just remember at full time, like the sense of achievement everyone felt, and players like Roger Johnson, Scott Dan, Barry Ferguson, Lee Bowyer just playing absolutely out of their skin. Like Seb Larson was just, it's just remarkable. Yeah. Everyone playing so well. McFadden just absolutely outstanding. And so that inevitably had to come to an end, but we ended up finishing 9th, which was an outstanding achievement. And I think we only lost 2 home games all season, which really showed it was about solidity more than anything. Of course, sadly, one of those losses was against Villa, sadly.
Well, I was going to say, like, the year that you went down under the Bruce McLeish year, we absolutely thumped you at Villa Park. But you got promoted, you came up, and as you're saying, you finished 9th. You had improved so much, and I think the results in the Second City derby actually really show that how much the teams had closed up really in that season. I mean, we were at the height of our power under Martin O'Neill at this point. Like, we were a really, really good team, and we only just beat you 1-0 and 1-0. And were there 2 late goals in both of them? Certainly, the one at Villa Park was a late goal.
Yeah, I think the first one, and also the one at St Andrews was really early in the season. It was like the 5th or 6th game. It was really early, really early, as always. Yeah, but yeah, the Villa Park one was probably from my memory, was probably the highest quality derby in terms of the levels of the 2 teams. Yeah. Like, my memory of that game is it was 2 genuinely top 10 Premier League teams, and how we lost that game to this day. I won't get too much into the penalty and everything. We discussed that a lot back in the day. I was very happy about that.
I think we agreed to disagree on it.
We agreed to disagree. We were robbed. But like, what an outstanding performance. And as you say, you finished 6th that year, 5th or 6th?
Yeah, we had, I think it was 3 years in a row we finished 6th under Martin.
Yeah. And this would have been the 3rd, wouldn't it?
This was the last one, yeah.
But then the following season obviously had the biggest thing of them all. The league form was not as good, but we got to February and we're in the Carling Cup final.
Yeah.
Kind of through that McLeish mentality of just being tough to beat, and that really came into its element in the final where we played 4-5-1, Zigic up top, who we brought in the summer, the 6'8" striker. And people criticise McLeish's style of football and how it's long ball, it's not pretty, it's not any of that. But no other style of football would have won us that cup.
No.
It's like considered the greatest achievement in the club's history. And I saw an interview with Barry Ferguson where he was talking about it, and he was really interesting to listen to. I think it was on Sly Ferry's podcast called Open Goal. Fully recommend it on YouTube if anyone wanted to check it out. It's really interesting because he talks about when he signed for Blues and McLeish. Barry Ferguson basically needed a club to go to, and he brought McLeish, who he knew from Scotland and Rangers, and McLeish was basically on the phone to him, said like I don't know, to be honest. I don't know if you've still got it. And Barry Ferguson was like, what? He just didn't expect that at all. He thought he could walk in. And McLeish said, like, I need you to lose however many pounds, and then maybe I'll consider it. And Ferguson's like, what? I've always played it this way. What are you talking about? But he was absolutely bang on. And Barry Ferguson came to Blues, and he was fitter than he'd ever been, and played probably as good as he's ever played in his career at Blues. He was absolutely exceptional at Blues. But he also said in that interview when they played Arsenal, McLeish said to them, if we go out there and we try and play them at football, they're going to beat us. So McLeish, I do think you look back on these things and he deserves credit for identifying the way to win, what the only way to win really was. It might seem like an obvious way to win, but it is true, it's the only way. And that cup run was just exceptional. Like, we beat you in the quarterfinal in a night game. But maybe a bit lucky.
Dark days.
Dark days. The only win I've seen of a Villa in my time as a fan. And then in the semi-final against West Ham, we were 3-1 down over
Yeah.
about halfway through the second leg, and he brings Zigic on at half time, and it just completely changed the game, and we ended up winning 4-3 after extra time. And like people criticize a player like Zigic who he brought in, but he knew in a situation like that, he knew exactly how to use him. He knew we bring this man on at half time, completely changed the style of play. And that was like genuinely one of the best individual performances I've ever seen from a Blues player was Zigic that night. He was used absolutely perfectly. And so I think McLeish has had a lot of credit for something like that. I don't know if you have any memories of that game against you in the League Cup properly.
I do. I remember it quite well actually, and it's probably because of the way the
Yeah.
game went. But like I was saying before, so the
You
season
didn't go,
before,
did you? You didn't go.
no. I'm really glad I didn't go because the scenes I think before and after the game were really terrible.
Oh yeah, kicked off a bit. Yeah.
Especially at the end of the game,
Yeah.
really. But no, like we were saying, so the season before was arguably as close at a high quality level the two teams have ever been. But it was almost like a real change over the summer. So you weren't as good the next season. We lost Martin O'Neill, we lost James Milner, and we were sort of struggling under Gerard Houllier, and it wasn't really until we bought Darren Benton in the January where we actually really started picking up points and looking like a half decent side again. But I remember going into that League Cup game, like really dreading it. I'm not. Usually, I'm pretty. You look forward to the derby, and you do get a few butterflies as it gets a little bit closer. But I remember that. I mean, especially when we play at St Andrews, I hate playing at St Andrews because it is a really hard place to go, and especially for us being the local rival and the big rivalry between the two. But that night, I remember really dreading it. We didn't play great. And did you go 1-0 up? I think Seb Larson scored a
Yes,
penalty.
that's right. Yeah, and then we had a goal. I wouldn't even say it was disallowed. It was never. It wasn't given, but people in the
Yeah,
stadium were like celebrating because I think was it Zigic had a shot and it like stopped on the line, and this is before goal line technology,
yeah,
so we kind of weren't sure if it went over or not.
yeah. And then we got back in the game, and it looked like it was going to run to extra time. And I remember at the time thinking, well, we'll just get to extra time, I suppose, really, because normally, I mean, so many of the second city derbies, especially at St Andrews, are draws, and this one was heading to that as
Mm.
well. And normally you'd probably take a draw away, and then there was the goal at the end. It's just such a clumsy goal. It's so fluky. Brad Friedel is so unlucky with the deflection because he would have saved it comfortably. And
Completely.
obviously, that's the nature of the goal. It was Zigic who scored it, who we didn't like because we all thought he was crap. Whatever.
Sure.
and and then it's the last minute. It's virtually the last kick of the game. It's like the first time you'd beaten us in years,
Yeah.
and you'd knocked us out the cup. There's just so much going on all at once.
Mm.
I- yeah, I'll never forget that game, and I'll never forget that Zigic goal. Like
So I remember before the
it's
goal.
haunting.
Oh, tell me about it? I've plenty of my share of that, but I do remember. I remember because I went to the game and I was like, we sit like almost like directly behind the goal
Mm.
in the upper tier. And I actually remember it like a little differently. I remember just before the goal, Villa were actually pressing a lot more and actually looked more likely to score. But it did very much feel like it was just going to go to extra time. But that's a game I'll never forget. It was in like, it was absolutely full to the rafters in the snow. It was just
Yeah.
like and when the goal went in, I mean, that might be, other than the Obafemi Martins goal, it's probably like my most rewatched Blues goal just on like
Yeah.
YouTube and stuff, which is mad because it's a rubbish goal. Let's be honest. Like it's like the luckiest, like technique free goal.
Yeah.
Um, but no, that run of the quarterfinal, semi-final, final, that three of the best games I've ever been to, and
Yeah.
just
I mean,
and they're so intertwined with like
the semi-final story is just as incredible as the whole run, really. Like,
oh, completely, yeah. I mean, that semi-final second leg is probably the greatest individual game I've been to. It was just remarkable. Um, so then we were in February. We won the cup. We're qualified for Europe for the next
yeah,
season for the first time in 50 years, and then everything just completely falls apart between then and the end of the season. So I think how they say like 40 points, you're going to be
yeah,
safe. Nowadays, it's even less.
Yeah, it's about
Um,
35 now.
yeah, it's really low now as the top teams have, they just swallow everyone up basically. I remember with 6 games left, we had 38 points.
Hmm.
And we got relegated on 39, which is insane. But we lost 2-1 at Spurs, and we're actually staying up with a couple of minutes to go. And this was
Yeah,
the
I
mad,
remember.
yeah, it's unbelievable. Like the mad survival Sunday where there was like 5 teams in it.
Yeah.
And I think Craig Gardner scored, and we equalised and we're staying up. And then I think Wolves scored in a game or something.
Was it Wolves Blackburn? Wolves
Yeah, and
came
Wolves they were
from
still losing.
yeah, Wolves were 3-0 down at half time and then
Yeah,
got to 3-2 and were then staying up on goal
yeah. So
difference.
the second goal was keeping them up on goals scored, was sending us down on
Yeah.
goals scored, not even goal difference. Um, and yeah, I, I mentioned Ferguson earlier. He was injured for a lot of this post Cup run, and I think he's a bit like what Bielik is to us now. Like when he's not there, we really, really miss him. Um, but I still never, until those last few games, I still genuinely never thought we'd go down. I thought we built something so good under McLeish. Despite the criticisms of the style and stuff, there's just such a good energy around the club a lot of the time. And to won the cup and like reach that that pinnacle, to then get relegated in 2011 was such a shock.
Yeah.
And obviously, then that summer, everything completely unravelled.
All hell broke loose.
All hell breaks loose. Carson Young got owned. So obviously, a big thing which happened in McLeish's era was the Carson Young administration came in 2009 and put a lot of money into players and so on. Then in 2011, he gets arrested. Everything kind of hits financial turmoil at Blues. And McLeish hands his notice in, so to speak. And I think this is where we maybe get into the Villa section. So I remember McLeish. I saw turned Sky Sports News on and saw the news that McLeish had left Blues, and then out of nowhere, rumours start flying around that he's going to go to Villa because Gerard Houllier had. So Gerard Houllier had been there the year before, but I think he'd gotten ill from what I remember.
He had, and he missed the final 5 games of the season through
Right.
illness. And it was Gary McAllister in his first stint as Aston Villa assistant manager who had guided us through the final 5 games. And it was actually the little, almost like new manager bounce under Gary McAllister that actually meant that we finished ninth that season. Because I always found with that season, you look at the league table, and until the season we've just had under Unai Emery, that was the last time we were in the top half at the end of the season. But I always felt that was a. I
Wow.
know they say the league table never lies. I always felt it did that year. I remember walking out of Villa Park on the final day of the season, and we looked at the table and went, "Oh my god, we're ninth! How did that happen?" Yeah, like we really weren't deserving of a top half finish that year. Um,
I remember Julio getting a lot of criticism for a lot of that season.
yeah, yeah. There was. I remember before we signed Darren Ben. There was. I think we played Sunderland at home around Christmas time, and we were singing "You're Getting Sacked in the Morning." Um,
You lost
uh,
1-0, didn't you? And you were in the
yeah,
bottom three or something.
it could have been Darren. I'd have to check, but it could have been Darren Bent who scored that night, and we went and signed him or something.
That rings a
Yeah,
bell.
I remember just before Christmas we played Liverpool and we got hammered 3-0 at Anfield. And he said in his post-match interview, "Well, if we're going to lose to any team, I don't mind it being Liverpool," or something ridiculous like that. Something you'd expect Steven Gerrard to say, like
Yeah.
unbelievable, really. Um,
Because I remember when we played you in the cup and we beat you 2-1, but then do you remember we played about a month later in the league or 6 weeks later and we drew 1-1.
yeah,
I think
vaguely.
Roger Johnson scored for us, and I think who scored for you? James Collins, maybe, I think rings a bell. But I remember you were in the bottom three when we played that day, and that was in like January, February. But of course, the following season, McLeish ends up at Villa and wasn't too well received, to say the least.
No, I mean, I can't imagine what it'd been like as a Blues fan, seeing that obviously you just got relegated, but the manager who just won you a major trophy against all the odds has resigned, and then to see him all of a sudden 5 days later go to your arch rivals. I mean, I remember at the time and being like, what would you want him for? Like, there's any manager out there, why would we want him? Because I never really understood it. Because I think you talk about the style of play, we never really. He wouldn't have been a manager you'd looked at going, we need this guy. This guy's really good. A bit like, unlike when when we got Steve Bruce in, we were like, this is the guy we need. It doesn't matter that he used to manage it. We need this guy.
And also with Bruce, there was the huge,
There was
like
a
a huge time gap as well. It was like 10 years or something, wasn't it?
Um, it's funny. Maybe if you hadn't won the cup, it might have been different. But I think obviously that was so fresh, and obviously we'd got knocked out in your cup run as well. So there was a lot of scars really going into that season. But yeah, we never wanted him, which is maybe unfair. We were, it's funny. I found the press release when we were planning for this, and he says in the press release in the announcement, I know that some of our fans have voiced concerns and I can understand why. It will be up to me to convince you that I am the right man to drive this club forward, and I intend to give absolutely everything to prove that I can be a success at the club. Tricky.
Did he ever have a chance? Was it ever going to work?
I don't think so. I think he and more importantly than this, Randy Lerner, the owner, and I think Paul Faulkner, who was the CEO at the time, they were incredibly naive and they incredibly underestimated the bitterness of the rivalry between Aston Villa and Birmingham City. Again, this was at a time we played each other quite a lot over that time span. It's not like how it's really been the last few years when we don't play each other anymore. So, I'll always think I understand why he took the job, because it's a Premier League club. It is a big club. It is a club that had been in the European places. I guess he would have seen it as a step up, but I'll never it was so naive. And I really do think they just completely underestimated that we as a fan base, but there's a reason no other manager had gone directly between the two. The only one that comes close was Ron Saunders, but he actually left Villa, had 6 months off, and then went to Blues, which is a bit different.
Of course.
So,
did you agree with, like, we say the Villa fans didn't want him? It got to a level of, I remember, like, there was like protests and stuff at Villa Park against it.
Yeah, I remember. I used to play football when I played Sunday League football. I remember there was someone I played with. Him and his dad went to games, and they had the McLeish out like painted on a bed sheet sort of thing. Really early on. I think my dad at the time was willing to give him a chance. I was never really convinced. I mean, how old? We were only like 11 or something.
Yeah, 13, 14.
Yeah. But yeah, he just never was able to get any credit in the bank with us. A bit like Steven Gerrard, the fans never took to him, and so when we weren't great, it's not like, come on, we think you can turn it around. We want to help you turn it around. It's a get out of here.
Because also you had a pretty good team still back then, right? Like, it wasn't. You still had like a Bonhor, you still had
Ashley
Petrov.
Young had just gone, but we still had Petrov, Gabby when he was still really good. And that summer we signed Shay Given, we signed Alan Hutton, and then we splashed the cash massively on Charles and Zogbia from Wigan.
So this is interesting because Blues. So before McLeish's last season at Blues, he really wanted Zogbia to come to Blues, and he would have been our record signing at the time. There was a lot of rumours that it was going to be sort of 8, 9, 10 million, and he never got him. And we talk about why he left Blues, and I remember at the time there was. So I tried to find it again for this podcast, but I just couldn't find it. Blues, the board or the owners or whoever after he left put a statement out saying that they had always, paraphrasing, but they had always supported McLeish and tried to help him get players in, like, Peter Odemwingie, and these are the ones that didn't end up happening. And it was quite unprofessional kind of critic. It was just something an owner shouldn't do, in my opinion. Like, I'm pretty sure you won't be seeing Tom Wagner doing that, touch wood. But the Nzogbia thing, I think, was clearly an example of where these owners, the Carson Young era, they claimed they could do these things and they could afford these players and fund these things, and it just never happened. And another one was Robbie Keane was meant to be coming in to Blues in the January for like 6 million or something. And Robbie Keane later came out and said there was nothing in it. They just made that up. Like they were using me as like just to get a story out, basically. But yeah, so Nzogbia meant to come to Blues, never happened. But he did get him at Villa the following year. Robbie Keane, he did get at Villa the following year, from what I remember. And so I can totally see why he saw Villa as, pains me to say it, but a step up. He's probably sick of the owners at Blues, and he saw Villa as a club that was in the Premier League, that was local, probably didn't have to move house, probably had a house in Birmingham, he didn't have to leave. And he probably thought, I'll have more money I'll probably be on a better salary, and I'll probably have more money to spend, and I'll achieve more at a club that has been more established in the Premier League. So I totally understand why he thought it would be a good idea.
And he probably thought as well, once the season started, some of the, oh my God, why have we signed this bloke, will have died down. And if we get a few wins under the belt, it'll all sort of become the past, I would imagine. And we didn't have a terrible start, but the big problem was the style of play. And I remember this, I don't know if you remember this, Dan. I remember we were in the playground at school once, and you came up and showed me something on your phone, and it was McLeish, and it said Agent 451. It was like a movie poster.
Oh, probably. I remember the one. It was like the Terminator poster, but
Yeah, I think it was
Relegator,
this
and
one.
it's
Yeah,
McLeish's head in the
yeah,
Schwarzenegger. That's so good.
yeah. I think
That
it
was
said
class.
Agent 451 on it. Yeah.
But I think that was
I
it. Because
remember.
Blues as well. Even though we were in the Championship the year McLeish was at Villa, you were really struggling and looked for a long time like you were going to go down. And Blues were having a really fun season in the Championship and had kind of been reinvented under Chris Hughton. And I remember there was kind of a bit of a glee amongst Blues fans that McLeish was failing so much at
Yeah.
Villa.
Yeah, I mean, his record with us was just dreadful. So I think we said it in the intro. We only won 4 games at home all season, and I remember our home form being absolutely dreadful. But yeah, we only won
Which
seven
is mental.
games. Yeah, we won 7 games all season, I think, and we drew 17 in that season. Like, it's just an insane amount of.
It, it's crazy that your home form was so bad because that was something that was such a bedrock with
Yeah.
Blues. Like even the year we got relegated, our home form was pretty good still. It was our away form that sent us down.
But it's not a shock though that our home form was dreadful because the atmosphere was terrible because it was just toxic. It's a toxic atmosphere. I mean, against the manager, the players had no chance really in that regard. And so we picked up. I think a lot of our draws were all away from home. Really, yeah, 10 draws away from home and 3 wins, which made the bulk of our points really. But I remember in the January we signed Robbie Keane on loan, which is funny. It's funny. There's always those players when you're growing up as well that play for other teams that you really like, and you're like, oh, I wish we could sign this player. Robbie Keane was always
You
one
always
of them.
signed them. You always signed them on Football Manager or something for your club.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I don't know whether it's because obviously, like, we have that sort of Irish heritage and connection. He was
yeah,
like the main man for the Republic of Ireland. And so
of
I
course.
always really liked Robbie Keane. I'm like, oh, I wish we could sign Robbie Keane. So it was really cool for me when he signed for us. And then the game that stands out was when we were away at Molineux. I think we won 3-1 or something like that, and he scored
Three
twice.
two. Yeah.
Yeah, we won by 3 goals to something, and he scored 2 cracking goals, unbelievable goals. One of them's amazing. And that was sort of a game that kept us up. Robbie Keane joined us on loan and kept us up in like 3 months. Um, so some of his signings were great. I mean, Shay Given, another talk about another player with that sort of Irish connection that I always loved. And I was a goalkeeper growing up, so I loved Shay Given. Um, so Hutton went on to be a bit of a club cult hero, and Zogbia.
Your favorite.
Uh, and Zogbia just never. There was a good player in there, and we saw it at Wigan, but just never happened for him with us. And he always there was flashes, but never justified the money or the wage that he was on. But yeah, it's not a great season, and wasn't really a shot. I think by the time the season had ended, I mean, we got 38 points. We couldn't win any matches or anything. it wasn't a shock to see him go. Really, it was kind of maybe it was more of about time. Like and we were in a relegation battle for a lot of that season because we just couldn't win. As I said, we just couldn't win any games. I don't know. With hindsight, they shouldn't have appointed him in the first place. And I think by the end of the season, they realised that they'd made a big mistake. But I think they should have realised earlier that they should have sacked him earlier on in the season, and it could have saved the season. And but he was also unlucky. He was joining us when we were on our deep decline as well.
Beginning of the end, really, wasn't it? For your sort of within a few years, you'd been relegated, and we're kind of stopping investing in the team. So
yeah, this was just as the money was about to run out for us as well. So the other thing is as well is Alex McLeish is having a bad enough season as it is. The fans hate him. The team is struggling. Players like Nzogbia aren't really performing. But then obviously he lost his lost the club captain in Stan Petrov when he got diagnosed with leukemia after we got smashed by Arsenal. I mean that just shocked the club, and I mean God knows what it did behind the scenes at the club level and for the players as well. For your captain, your club captain, a great guy, and he can't.
One of your best players. Right?
Yeah, easily one of our best players, and I remember that was like really, really shocking and unbelievable in a weird way. It's just something that just is kind of it's just so rare that something like that would happen. That was.
It's interesting you say you got 38 points. So his season at Villa, he got less points than he did at Blues the year we got relegated. That sums up how bad it was. You got less points, only a point less, but it's still a point.
Yeah.
And you say you won 7 games, so you won less. I think we won 8 or 9 the year we got relegated. And that's mad because he had a better team at Villa, for sure. And the expectation is different as well. I know he obviously won the Copper Blues, so that's a huge factor. But I think that shows the level of underachievement. I think it's a rare case where when a manager goes after like one season, it always just feels too soon, unless it's like they really didn't have too much time. But McLeish, it just never felt like it was gonna. It's like Graham Potter at Chelsea this year, just gone. It's just never gonna last. It's just never in a million years gonna last.
Yeah, and it was just one. It was almost like one thing after another. But there were good moments in that season, like we mentioned the Wolves game, and the other one was that we played at Stamford Bridge and we got a shock 3-1 win at Stamford Bridge. And I remember that was just incredible at the time. Chelsea were an amazing team. They'd not long spent like 50 million on Fernando Torres. I think this was the season they won the Champions League. Like they were great. They were a good team.
Yeah, it would have been. Gosh, yeah. I don't remember that game at all. I don't remember that at all. Beating Chelsea 3.
Yeah, it's one of the few I remember from that season because it was really good moments. But we just weren't able to use it as a turning point, and the home form was always a bit of a killer, really. But yeah, McLeish, when we moved on to Paul Lambert, which is a story for another day, probably. But
yes,
Alex McLeish,
another tragic tale.
Yeah. But McLeish would, as we said in the intro, would kind of stick around in the Midlands, but he goes to the east side this time to Nottingham Forest. Where it was just a disaster again.
A complete disaster. He was on there for a few months, from what I remember.
40 days.
But 40 days. Wow. Okay, that's wow. I thought it was longer than that. Wow. But his last game. So I may be wrong on this, but I think the only time he's come back to Blues as a manager was as Nottingham Forest manager, and we beat them 2-1, and he got sacked like 3 days later. And similarly, he fell out with the board over. I think he wanted like George Boyd or someone. Or George Boyd. Was that it?
Boyd, yeah.
And they and that fell apart, and I think he either walked or he got sacked. Didn't end well anyway.
I think he fell out with them and they sacked him because he had a relative, probably had a 3-year deal or something.
Of course. And then we mentioned he went to Belgium for a bit. He went to Egypt for two very short spells. Didn't work at all. And then I remember he went back to Scotland, didn't he, for not long at all for the
Yeah,
Euros
he was
qualifying a couple of
the
years ago.
national team manager, yeah. But um, again, it just never really worked out for him there. And it's funny though, actually. So I think we said in the intro, sort of the beginning of the end of him was taking the job at Villa. But arguably, you could his high point in management, which was winning the cup with Blues. It was actually all downhill from there. That was the peak
100%.
because
100%.
nothing good really happened after that, and his career completely collapsed. Blues got relegated. His season at Villa destroyed his reputation, if anything else. And then
It's interesting to
not.
think. Sorry, Karen.
No, I was going to say Nottingham Forest were renowned for sacking managers at that time, and
It's interesting. Like he left Villa over 10 years ago, so 2012 that would have been he left Villa. It's amazing how little he's actually managed since then. So we're talking like 11 years ago. So he was at Forest for 40 days. He was at Genk for not very long,
that
or a few
season. He was
months.
Egypt for 10 games.
Egypt for 10 games, and then Scotland. First of all, it's a national job, so you're only, it's not like a club football where you're managing every
Yeah,
week. And he wasn't there long at all. Had a disastrous. I remember when he went back to Scotland, it felt like a like really
yeah, it
like
was.
it just felt kind of strange. It's mad as well because Scotland feel like they're in a good place now. They're really picking up, but we're
Well,
only
yeah.
talking like a few years ago. Yeah.
Well, Steve Clark took over from McLeish, didn't he? And like they're in
And they
their golden
qualified, which is mad.
generation. Yeah, they're in their golden
They qualified
generation
for that
now.
tournament.
Yeah,
Like the tournament, they started so badly in the qualifying, he got sacked. But then they qualified for that Euros, which is mad. But so McLeish has been out of work for like over 4 years now, which is kind of remarkable, and you kind of feel like there's probably no coming back from that, really.
I'd be amazed if he was ever managing again because there's no team in the top two, maybe even three divisions of England would hire him. Maybe he could end up with a job in one of the Scottish tiers, or but he's tried abroad in Genk and Egypt, and it didn't really work. The national, maybe he'll have a third stint when Steve Clark leaves. Or him
Sure.
or Gordon
Oh,
Strachan will take it back up or something.
oh,
Um,
it's inevitable, completely inevitable.
but
But in kind of summary, it's quite a shame to see him like maybe not so much for you, but I think as a Blues fan, having seen some of my absolute favourite memories, that promotion in 2009, the amazing Premier League season, the cup win. It's quite sad seeing, like you say, after the cup win, his career just kind of fall apart. And it's a shame as well, like because his Blues legacy, mainly I think for the Villa thing, has really suffered as a result. And like when Blues do like a reflection thing, or bring ex managers back for like a dinner or something. He might be there, but it doesn't really feel the same as it probably should. He should be
yeah,
like, for the guy that won
he should
the only
arguably
trophy
be
most of.
someone with a statue outside the ground holding the trophy or
Yeah,
something.
pretty much, yeah,
Um,
completely. So it's a shame that he's not, but I think when it was good, I remember it being very good and was very influential in my sort of teenage years as a Blues fan. Um, so yeah,
I feel like maybe from a blues perspective, time can be a great healer,
yeah,
and also as well, he didn't have any success with us,
no,
so
exactly. And I think
it's
when you take out like you know the the emotional aspect of it, which I know is hard because it's football and it's emotions, 99% of it. But like as I said earlier, you can't if he's just been relegated with Blues and he's been a Premier League club clearly wants him. Like Randy Lerner clearly wanted him at Blues.
yeah,
Sorry, at Villa. He's like you'd be mad to turn it down. It's
yeah,
like you'd
yeah.
be mental. So I remember like Paul Merson at the time saying, I know some people don't like Paul Merson, but I do think he hits the nail on the head occasionally. He said something like, "This isn't Trevor Francis Villa are hiring. This is a guy who managed Birmingham for a few years. It's not like the greatest ever player they've ever had. So him as an ex-Villa player, he didn't really understand the animosity at all. At all. But I get what you're saying that you just didn't rate him that much as a manager.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of it, we should have given him a chance maybe, but didn't want to. But fans have that all the time. If there's a player that comes in and you don't want them, or a manager, it happens. It'll happen to every club at some point. I mean, you look, the way that maybe Unai Emery was hounded out of Arsenal, or Graham Potter at Chelsea.
Yeah,
it's just football, isn't it?
it is. It's just football. Cool. So, if that's all good with you, Cal, I think that pretty much wraps up our discussion on Alex McLeish.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've covered all bases on terms of his time at both Blues and Villa. And as you can probably
Yeah,
see,
absolutely.
my light is fading quite quickly.
Yeah, I can tell.
It
Yeah,
got progressively
you're an hour
darker
ahead.
since we started.
We've gone international again on this podcast, live from Italy. Callum's in Italy. I'm in Bromsgrove, but yeah. But no, so we are hoping to do more of these sort of in-depth player manager specials that played for both Blues and Villa. So let us know if there's any you'd be really interested in hearing about. Obviously, Steve Bruce is quite an obvious one. I'm sure we'll get around to that. A few others we're considering: Kevin Phillips, Curtis Davis, the Gardeners, Hotter. Obviously some more successful than others, but that's what could make it interesting, I guess. So yeah, let us know if there's anyone in particular you'd like us to maybe do next when we next get a chance.
Yeah, and if you have any comments on the way we formatted this one-off show, we don't really want to talk about the international break because there's nothing to really talk about. There's a couple of stories this week, but nothing major. So, just give us a comment, follow our socials, tweet us, comment on our YouTube and what have you, subscribe on Spotify and every other podcast app under the sun, and leave us the 5-star ratings.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you so much to everyone who's been listening so far as well and supporting and so on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, we really, really do. So thank you very, very much, and hopefully
Absolutely.
we can keep going.
Yeah, 100%. We'll be back next week with a bit more back to normal. We'll look back on the result that just happened last week, which obviously we didn't get into this week, and we'll look ahead to the next round of fixtures. So until next time, Carl.
Until next time, Dan. See you next week.